Christmas present ideas? Help us at hand now on BBC One from Patrick Moore.
We're going to discuss now telescope parameters, including the very latest computer-controlled high-tech ones. But first of all, news notes, beginning with the Mars probe. Well, Mars Polar Lander has come down on the red planet. That we know, and it really is as much as I can tell you now. I'm recording this on December the 4th, and so far there's been no signal from the probe. I only have to establish contact. We must wait and see, so let's keep our fingers crossed. And then, November 18th, the Leonid meteors. Now, 1999 has not been my year. I was carried out for the eclipse, and I was for Leonids. Again, I was sitting there under an umbrella listening to the rain, and I saw nothing at all. But Martin Mobberley went to the Sinai Desert, and he had much better luck. Martin, welcome back to the sky at night.
Thank you, Patrick.
How were your Leonids?
Well, I'm very sorry to hear you were clouded out, Patrick. I was with Dr. John Mason in the Sinai Desert and about 70 other amateurs, and we had a fantastic view. Here are some photographs that I took at the time, but they don't really do justice to what we saw. At the peak, we were seeing about 50 Leonids per minute. But don't despair, because David Asher and Rob McNaught, who predicted this storm so well, are predicting even bigger things for 2001.
Well, I hope they're right. And now, of course, there is something entirely new in the sky, the brightest nova, or new star, for the last 25 years.
Yes, it's the brightest Northern Hemisphere nova since Nova Cygni in 1975. It's fractionally brighter than Nova Cygni 92. It's Nova Aquila number 299. It's currently magnitude 4.1. It's not far from Delta Aquila, which is easily seen on this chart. It'll be interesting to see how that develops.
It certainly will. Now, that you can see with the naked eye quite easily, but for most branches of astronomy, you do need a telescope. I've got my own observatory down at Chelsea, and here's a picture of it, taken from my chimney stack, I may say. See there my 5-inch refractor and the dome of my 15-inch refractor, and that serves me very well. Of course, telescopes are either good or cheap, not both. And many people don't want to go to the expense of buying a good telescope. But luckily, there are much cheaper alternatives.
Well, sadly, we'll have to spend at least £200 to get a really good amateur telescope, but fortunately there is one excellent cheap alternative, and that's a good pair of binoculars. In fact, our leading discoverer, George Alcock from Peterborough, uses nothing more than binoculars, and he's discovered 5 comets and 5 novae.
There are many kinds of binoculars. What would you recommend?
I'd strongly recommend getting a pair like this, 10 by 50s. These numbers need some explanation. 10 is the magnification, and 50 is the diameter of the aperture in millimeters. And if we divide the aperture by the magnification, in this case 50 divided by 10 gives us 5 millimeters, and that's the diameter of the exit pupil. As we can see in this diagram, the exit pupil is the bundle of rays leaving the eyepiece that's trying to get into the tiny pupil of the eye, which in broad daylight is only 2 millimeters across. Which means for a 50mm aperture, we have to whack the magnification up to 25 times to get it into that pupil. But at night, the eye dilates to about 7 or 8 millimeters. That means we can go to a lower magnification, about 7 to 10 times, and it'll all pass through the pupil. If we go too far, though, we go to 3 to 4 times with a 50mm aperture, we'll have about a 14mm exit pupil, far too big to fit into the eye. All this means that a magnification of about 10 times with 50mm binoculars is about optimum. Certainly if you go above about 10 times, well, unless you're built like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you'll find that holding binoculars at high power for more than a few minutes really will make your shoulders fake, and then you need to put your tripod.
You certainly do. One important point is that binoculars are very, very important.
Yes, they are. You can buy a pair of 10 by 50 Russian binoculars, for example, for around about £95. You can go up to 15 by 70s Russian binoculars, then will cost you £150. We've got a selection of 80mm binoculars here. This is my American Celestial pair, which will cost about £400, but you can get Russian ones for about £250.
I, for one, would much rather have a good pair of binoculars like this than a very small telescope. And Martin, there are plenty of binocular objects in the night sky.
Yes, I think most people are absolutely amazed if you take them to a dark sky with a good pair of binoculars and show them what they can see in the winter Of course, we've got a nova now for a start. Apart from that, we've got objects like, for instance, the Orion Nebula, easy to find with a 5-degree binocular field. The stellar birthplace, 1,500 light-years away, of course. A harder target, perhaps, is the cluster of 9th magnitude stars, M35, in Gemini. And then moving across to the Hyades, that's the V-shaped cluster in Taurus, and in the same field, the reddish star Aldebaran, which appears distinctly red in binoculars. Then, of course, the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. Well, you'll certainly see more than 7 stars through binoculars. And here's an artist's impression of the 5-degree binocular field.
No doubt binoculars are giving a tremendous amount of enjoyment because they do have one major disadvantage. You cannot have a really high magnification.
No, and for high magnification, you really do need a telescope. But if you look at the Pleiades through a telescope, instead of seeing the 5-degree field of binoculars, you'll see a much reduced 1-degree field. Fainter stars, but a narrower field. And most people are quite amazed if you show them Saturn can be seen with only 20 times magnification. It will look something like as it appears in this video. Now, sadly, though, you will have to spend something like £300 or £400 for a really good astronomical telescope, say something like an 80mm refractor. But it's probably worth emphasising it's worth spending just a bit more on a telescope, because a telescope can be for life, not just for Christmas.
Oh, absolutely right there. And at this stage, Martin, I'm going to repeat one warning I've given countless times before, and that is, don't look straight at the sun through any telescope or binoculars, even by using a dark filter. If you do, you will damage your eyesight. This has happened. So there's one golden rule about looking straight at the sun. Telescope, well, telescopes themselves. Two types, reflectors and refractors. And most people, including me, began with a refractor.
Yes, I think most people, when they think of a telescope, they think of something with a lens, and that's a refractor. We can see in this diagram how a refractor works. Light comes in through the front of the telescope, through the lens, then we see light come past the moon, and then through the opposite side of the moon, arriving, it's focused and forms an image of the focal plane. And then the eyepiece can be used to examine the image of the moon in this case. Refractors have one disadvantage. They suffer from chromatic aberration. This means that in the refractor, like the one next to you there, will cost about £100 to £150. It'll show the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, phases of Venus, for example. And it'll certainly please the beginner, but after a while, you may well want something a bit bigger. And a decent 80mm refractor you'll get for, let's say, £300 or £400. The much larger 4-inch refractor you've got just behind your old 3-inch scope costs about £800. And of course, that's well beyond most people's limit.
But of course, for the same kind of financial outlay, you can get a much larger reflector.
Yes, reflectors are excellent value for money, and I've got one just beside of me here. They feature mirrors. They have 2 mirrors, and you can just see the secondary mirror obstructing the light path there. I think some people are a bit suspicious that telescopes that use mirrors, but the world's professionals use telescopes that use mirrors. There's really nothing to be worried about. Here's how they work. Light comes in through the telescope tube, hits the first mirror, and it brings the light up to focus. But of course, you can't stick your head where the light's going to be focused because you've blocked the incoming light. So the second mirror then diverts the light out of the tube to the eyepiece, where again you examine the image at the focal plane. Now, reflectors are excellent value for money. You can pick up a 4-inch, 100mm reflector around £200, a 6-inch, maybe on a good mounting for £450, £500, something like this compact 6-inch Celestron here. As you increase aperture, you improve the resolution, the light grasp, you see fainter stars, but also you reduce the field of view. And we can see in this table how that works. And you'll notice that for only a 100mm 4-inch aperture, you can resolve to 1 second of arc. That's a 3,600th of a degree. It's 60 times better than you can see with the eye. Now, Jupiter, which is an excellent target for an amateur telescope, shows a wealth of detail. That spans 50 seconds of arc. So it doesn't take a genius to work out that you can easily see fine detail on the planets, even with a small telescope. And here's a CCD image I took of Jupiter back in August with quite a large amateur telescope. It shows Jupiter's moon Io casting a shadow onto the surface of the planet.
That's a very good picture indeed, because there's one thing we have got to battle against. We live at the bottom of an ocean of air, and frankly, our atmosphere is a nuisance.
Sometimes I think the Earth's atmosphere is far more trouble than it's worth, to be honest. Here's a video I shot many years ago of the moon, and although it's a good night, you can see there's a bit of turbulence at the edge, and that's because of the Earth's atmosphere. You can't quite see the fine detail, but that was a good night. Now, as you and I know, Patrick, as seasoned observers, things can be much worse than that.
They can.
Here's a video I took of Saturn a couple of years ago saying just how bad the seeing can be. It's a terrible, blurred and chronic view, but the kind of night that planetary observers dream of. Quite often it's a sort of murky, misty night, maybe with a telescope dripping with dew. But under those conditions, you get excellent planetary resolution. And it was one of those nights on October the 6th when one of our expert planetary imagers, Damien Peach from King's Lynn, took this absolutely stunning image of the planet Saturn with a 12-inch reflector. It really does show what you can see from your own observatory.
That really is a magnificent picture, and certainly congratulations to him. I think, of course, that comets and nebulae are not quite affected in the same way. But now, Martin, something else. There's no point in using a good telescope on the shaky mounting. So let's say that now about telescope mounts.
Yes, as you get larger and larger telescopes, more and more magnification, you really do want a decent mounting. And many amateurs may consider an equatorial mounting. Now, objects that are in the night sky move. They move due to the Earth's rotation. It would be nice if we could counteract this rotation. This may seem a trivial point, but the moon, for instance, drifts its own diameter in only 2 minutes of time. It can be a real nuisance. So an equatorial mounting compensates for this. Now, as we can see in this diagram, the Earth rotates about its polar axis, and the polar axis points pretty close to the star Polaris. If we can design a mounting that also points to star Polaris, tilted over by 38 degrees from the zenith at 52 degrees north, then we'll be able to track and compensate for the Earth's rotation. And that's exactly what we see on this equatorial mounting here. This axis here points towards the star Polaris. Now, an equatorial mounting is essential for photography and for CCD imaging. It's not absolutely essential for visual observing, though.
And one can get far simpler mounts. I'm thinking here, of course, of our old friend, the Dobsonian.
Yes, well, we have a Dobsonian mounting here. This is a 6-inch Dobsonian. They were invented by, would you believe, an ex-Californian monk, John Dobson, who has spent his life popularizing astronomy. Notice that this telescope moves easily in azimuth. It has a low bearing friction resistance. It's Teflon or PTFE. Similarly, those Teflon or PTFE pads here move very easily. Where you point it, the eyepiece is nearly always in a convenient position. And these are very good value for money. Typically, a 6-inch Dobsonian will cost something like £300, an 8-inch £400. You can actually build this kind of tube and mount yourself. Our leading visual variable star observer, Gary Poynier, uses a 16-inch Dobsonian. And last year, he submitted 12,000 variable star magnitude estimates to the BAA using his 16-inch here, despite living in cloudy and light-polluted Birmingham.
Well, of course, he has an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of the sky. He can recognize many thousands of stars straight away. But there are many people who find difficulty in finding their way around the sky. And luckily, there are now telescopes which will do it for you.
Well, there has never been a more exciting time to buy a small amateur telescope, particularly if you've got a bit of money to spare, a few £100. Now, perhaps the telescope that started this revolution is this Meade ETX here. It's a 90mm aperture, 3.5 inches. The first thing you notice about it is just how compact the tube assembly is for a 3.5-inch instrument. Now, this can only come about from either a Schmidt-Cassegrain or a Max-Sutov design. In the Schmidt-Cassegrain, light passes through a corrector plate. Then it's like a reflector. There's a mirror which bounces the light up the tube, but then the second mirror bounces the light through a hole in the primary mirror. It's a very compact system. In the Max-Sutov design, the Schmidt corrector plate is replaced by a curved meniscus lens, and the second mirror is just an illuminized spot on that lens. Again, the light goes back through a hole in the primary. And that's the system that this ETX uses, but that's only part of the secret of this telescope. The real strength of this telescope is it is computer controlled. It's got a brain, and it's got 14,000 objects in its database. To use this telescope, you need know nothing about astronomy. You simply take it out on a clear night, switch it on, tell it your date, time, latitude, and longitude, and it'll then slew round to find a bright star that it wants to calibrate on, something like Capella in Auriga, for example. You then position the telescope exactly on that star and calibrate it. It then whizzes off to a second star, say Betelgeuse in Orion. You then do the same thing, position it on that. Once you've calibrated it on that second star, it knows exactly where it is in the sky. You can then get it to give you a guided tour to show you, say, the Pleiades or the Orion Nebula, something like that, or any of the 14,000 objects in its database. And as it does this, it will show you all the encyclopedic details. It will scroll across on its hand controller and show you all the legends and myths about the constellations, details, facts. You will need to spend £600, though, which is a lot of money for some people. But the good news is that this kind of technology is now filtering down to cheaper refractors and reflectors in the mid-range. So soon you'll be able to get this technology for £300 or £400. And there are larger telescopes with the same technology of a similar style. For instance, Mead's main competitor, Celestron, have just brought out this spectacularly styled Nexstar, and we used one of these in the Sinai Desert. It's got all the features but a bigger 5-inch aperture, but it will cost about £1,200.
And of course, you can apply the same principles to really large telescopes.
Yes, a lot of this technology has filtered down from the Schmidt-Cassegrains like the Meade LX200 that came in the early 1990s. The Meade LX200's got even more features. You can remote control it from indoors and use a CCD camera with it, of course. But they will cost about £2,000 with all the bells and whistles for about an 8-inch model.
Right, Martin, let's come down to earth. Christmas is coming. People want to buy telescopes. You have £200 to spend. What do you recommend?
I would seriously recommend going for a pair of binoculars. If you've certainly got £100, £150, then the choice is simpler. Binoculars have to be it. You can look through the second-hand advertisements in astronomy magazines as well. Sometimes you've got a bargain. Also, the internet is full of advice on how to build your own telescopes, either the mounting and the tube or the optics as well. And in fact, people have built their own telescopes. Our leading amateur telescope maker in this country is John Wall. He's not a man who thinks small. He has a 32-inch telescope and a 42-inch telescope. Quite remarkable. Let's hope he doesn't live next door to Victor Meldrew.
You're probably right, yes. But I know one thing, Martin. If you look next month, I'll be joined by Dr. Astronomy at AD1000. And this is our last program of 1999, not the last one of the millennium, that was 2001. So I think it's not too early, I hope, to wish you a very happy Christmas, New Year, and clear skies. Good night.